So imagine you just found out you're about to lose your job, and then of course after a little mental breakdown, you decide to make the conscious decision to switch from software engineering to product design, only to realize you haven't touched your design portfolio in over 6 years. And suddenly you need to prove that you're a designer, and fast. I had absolutely no design portfolio, no old files to work off of, nothing. So here's exactly how I built one from scratch. Hi everyone, I'm Cecilia, and if you're new here, I recently transitioned from software engineering back to product design. Today, I wanted to take you through the exact process that I used to build my portfolio, going from literally nothing to a full live design website. From the late night research sessions, the Figma wireframes, why I chose Framer over coding it myself, and all the mistakes I made rushing through it. It took me about 3 to 4 months to complete it, while I was still a software engineer, and now that it's been about 6 months since I finished it, I figured I could share the whole process with you. I'll also show you what a typical day looks like for me now as a freelance designer, just to give you a glimpse of my life, which is very, very different from my corporate days. So back when I found out I was getting laid off, I realized I needed to prepare for my career transition. I needed a design portfolio and I needed it fast. This meant that the portfolio had to happen while I was still working full-time. This also meant a lot of late nights and a lot of work on the weekends. I'd do my engineering job during the day and switch into design mode at night. The last time I touched my design portfolio was in college because I genuinely didn't think I'd ever need it again. But here's what's interesting. Even though I'd been a software engineer, I realized I'd been designing the entire time. So while I was still working as an engineer, I started the process of rebuilding everything for my new design career. So on my first engineering team in corporate, I was the only front-end engineer on a team of full back-end engineers and no designer. So I ended up designing an internal dashboard while using responsive web design, Figma, React, and JavaScript. When I joined my second team, our designer ended up leaving around the same time that I joined, so I became both an iOS engineer and a designer while the team was looking for a new one. I had the chance to work with a product owner and a bunch of designers as they filled me in on how to design for a mobile enterprise feature. After that, my team actually transitioned into creating mobile components for the new design system. And again, I was able to utilize my design skills and learned a lot. While I was looking at my past projects, I realized I needed something that was 100% my own and also something recent, which is why I designed the book app. This was a great way for me to experiment, find my style, brush up on my skills, see what trends were currently trending, try out new tools, and find some new explorations and discoveries in the world of design. I had a lot of fun with this one, and if you want more info, I have a full YouTube video dedicated to the whole design process of this. So all in all, I had a lot of work to show, but I just had no idea how to present it as a designer rather than an engineer who happened to design things. Alright, so let me show you how I actually started, and the research phase was pretty intense. I spent the first few days looking at other portfolios, not to copy but to understand the patterns. What information and types of projects do people usually include? How long should case studies be? What information architecture works? How much is too much for a case study and how much is too little for a case study? And stuff like, should I include my resume directly or just link to it? I also started talking to some friends who were already in the industry and seeing what their advice was. Also started Googling it and reading articles about it, and I basically thought of this as the UX portion of my portfolio. I ended up collecting around 20 to 30 portfolio examples, and yes, looking at all these portfolios while mine didn't exist really wasn't great for my confidence, but it helped me see what worked and what didn't. I made a big Google Doc of all the portfolios that I really liked, and here are some more examples. The main thing to remember for case studies, I realized, is that people don't hire you just for pretty pictures. They also want to see your thought process and will hire you for how you think through problems. That mindset completely changed my approach when I was writing my case studies. Instead of trying to make everything look perfect, I focused on explaining my decision-making process. I also had to think about other parts outside of the case study, such as where to put my resume, to include an About Me page, and what to put in that as well. And of course, a way for potential clients to contact me. After I kind of figured out what goes into a case study, I went ahead and tried to find the vibes of the portfolios that I liked. Basically, this was the UI portion of the design. This helped me figure out what I like, what I don't like, how to format all my pages and my case studies, what to include such as having a floating table of contents, and how to group information. There's also decisions like whether to include illustrations, where to get those illustrations, how in-depth I wanted to get, and a lot more. Having a sense of what it would look like at the end really helped me figure out which projects to include and what information to include. So here's my Figma. I wanted to show you how I laid out everything just for transparency and so that you could see how I group things. I have an entire section on what I wanted my mockups to look like. I have my mobile section here. I ended up using a lot of these, and I also have my browsers for my web projects. All of these mockups are actually through Figma in the community resources, and they're all free, so you guys can go through and see which ones match your aesthetic. I just really like these because of the way that the phones were laid out and the color scheme as well, and how simple it was. Here are all of my consolidated sections on the portfolios that I really like to look at. Like I said, I took screenshots of these and put them in one spot so that whenever I was working on a certain page or working on a certain section in my case study, I had something to look back on, designs to refer to, when I was making choices for my own portfolio. So once I knew what I wanted to include, I had to figure out how to build it. And honestly, as someone who could code it, I just didn't have the time. I spent a few weeks evaluating my options. There's a lot of tools out there like Webflow, WordPress, Squarespace, Wix, but Framer made the most sense for me. Also, disclaimer, I am not sponsored in any way by any of these companies. I have like 300 followers. So this is just my decision and something that I really wanted to use. Coming from iOS development, the component structure in Framer felt very familiar. So all the H stacks, V stacks, that's a lot of how Framer works as well. So it's basically Swift UI for designers. So while I was poking around Framer, I found out that they had templates as well, and I found some really cool ones that helped me jumpstart the process of creating my portfolio without starting from scratch. The end product ended up not looking like the templates that I used, especially since I started figuring out how Framer works and more efficiently on my own. But if looking at a blank Framer screen is daunting, which it was for me, starting with a template is a great way to start. The technical learning curve was still there. I did spend a bit of time trying to figure everything out and understanding where things were in the interface, but there's a lot of great tutorials online that really helped me. These are all over YouTube and on the Framer website as well. So that's something to check out if you need. I wanted to quickly go over the Framer interface with you and what it looks like for my portfolio. So this is the main page, and you have the desktop, tablet, and phone versions. Having these breakpoints and making everything responsive was a slight learning curve while working with Framer, so that's something to consider. I do think because everything was pretty manual, that took a lot of time for me. Here are all my pages. I have home, about, the fun page, all my case studies, and a 404 page just in case something went wrong. And this is the layers tab. As you can see, there's separate ones for each of your desktop, tablet, and phone. The easiest way for me to work through this was to work on the desktop first, make sure everything is squared up and perfect there, then go to tablet and phone to make sure all the spacing and the sizing was correct. The layers tab can get pretty long and pretty intense, especially with the projects. Yeah, it just gets very, very long. And I also wanted to include this table of contents, which hovers over the whole page. So that was also something that I had to figure out. As you can see, these blue lines have nested components, and that's pretty similar to Figma. The learning curve from Figma to Framer is a little bit there, but it's not as bad as people might think. The idea of grouping items, grouping layers and components together is also still here. Also, these stacks, like I mentioned earlier, the V stacks and H stacks that Swift developers are used to, also work the same way in Framer. I do love that all of the responsivity and animations are built into Framer, so it's not something extra that I have to think about. And of course, because I didn't have to code any of this out, it saved me probably over a month of work. Okay, so we just got to the coffee shop and hopefully you guys can hear me. Here I just wanted to talk about writing my case studies. Alright, so the case studies took the longest. Each one was basically like a 3,000 word essay, and I am not exaggerating. I'd work on these after my day job, usually from like 8 p.m. to way past midnight, and I felt like I was cramming for a college essay again. So let me show you the structure that I used. After a lot of iteration, this is the format that I landed on. I basically created a case study template for myself because I knew I would need it for all of my case studies. I had things like the heading, which would be the main image once you click on the case study. Then I had the overview, highlights, the challenge, solution, research summary, design process, testing and validation, key features, layout design, interactions, visual elements, final designs, developer handoff, and finally reflections. So not all of these sections will make it for every single case study, it just depends on the project, but this was the template that I started with just to get the ball rolling. As you can see here for the Kuma case study, I followed the same template. I would start out with a huge brain dump of everything that I wanted to include, and then I would go on and kind of put them in sections that are applicable. And this really helped me organize my thoughts so that I just have this Word document to work off of before I worked on any UX or UI element. This also helped me kind of understand what images to include and how to show the product and the process well. For the Capital One projects, everything I included was already public facing, and I was extra careful to make sure nothing was confidential material. And once I had all the written content, I wireframed everything in Figma first. All of this has color for now, but before they were all just gray boxes, no colors, just information hierarchy. This saved me from getting distracted by making things pretty before they made sense. And then of course after that, I filled in the wireframes with actual UI design after figuring out the aesthetic and vibe that I wanted. I had to figure out what illustrations that I wanted, so I would just use placeholder boxes for that. I ultimately went for soft gradients with an emphasis on yellow and blue, like a bright spring sky, which was what I was gravitating towards at the time. All of the information is divided exactly like the Word doc that I had. So you've got the main header, overview, highlights for the images, challenge, solution, high-level goals, design process, iterations, etc., etc. And again, this would look different for each case study. These were the final designed out case studies for my 2 Capital One projects. This includes all of the image assets, the illustrations, the graphs, and the text. I have this for the Luna case study as well. It's almost a one-to-one copy of what I have live on Framer. And also for the book app that I created, which also includes links to the prototype. So that's how I created my case studies. I hope that was informative, and I'll be talking about the next steps back at home. Alright, so we're back home now, and I wanted to go over what we have so far. I have all my case studies ready, I have my UI finished in Figma, some templates to start off from, and my no-code tool. Now it's time to put everything from Figma into Framer. There is a Figma plugin that allows you to do this quickly, but I could not get it to work correctly for me, so I ended up doing everything manually, which definitely took up a lot more time than it should have. And also, like I said, I was making sure everything was correctly responsive for tablet and mobile, which also took quite some time. Honestly though, I do think this helped me understand Framer better. Each component, each breakpoint, I had to really think through the responsive behavior. Getting the navigation and the links and the layouts to work properly took an entire day. Every text element needs variants for desktop, tablet, and mobile. The spacing changes, the font sizes, everything kind of adds up. So once I finished polishing everything up in Framer, this was typically when the doubt would hit. Like, I finished it, I took a good look at it, and I was thinking, is it good enough? Am I even a real designer? This doesn't look nearly as good as the other examples that I saw. But you just push through because you know this is the path forward. The domain situation was another story. CeciliaKim.com was taken and has been taken for quite some time now. In the past, like I mentioned before, I had CeciliaKim.org, but that expired and I didn't really like .org for this. So I ultimately went with CeciliaKimDesign.com, which ended up working out pretty well because now all my social media handles match. For the domain, Christian actually recommended something called Porkbun, and yes, that's actually the name of it, and it's honestly one of the best domain registrar experiences I've had so far. Connecting to Framer was literally like 3 clicks, hit publish, and then you're live. Okay, so now I want to show you the final product, my portfolio. So here's the homepage. This is the header. I have a gradient in the background that kind of moves. Not sure if that comes across in the screen share, but I thought that was a really cool design element in one of the templates, so I decided to keep that. I have all of my social media and ways of contacting me here so that it's easy for anyone who's looking for that. If you keep scrolling down, I have all of my projects. So the book app, Kuma being the most recent one. I helped Christian with the design system for his Luna budgeting app. And then of course my corporate projects. I also have an about page that just says a quick blurb about me, along with my experience, which basically is my resume. I also added some skills and some favorite tools that I use because I noticed other portfolios had that. I added a fun page as well, just for anyone coming across my portfolio to get to know me better and to add a little bit of personality. Talk about my hobbies, things that I love and enjoy, such as reading, making art, and painting. Maybe in some of my future videos I can show you my art as well. Alright, so let's get to the good stuff, which is the case study. I'll choose the book app because it's pretty comprehensive, and I'll just scroll through this. You can go see this at any time on my portfolio, but I wanted to go over how we started from researching, looking at other portfolios, figuring out what projects I wanted to include. Afterwards, I wanted to figure out the UI. This means the color palette, the vibes, the typography, any illustrations, graphs, everything. And you'll notice how each section is divided up the same way that I had my case studies template. This really helped me to not get overwhelmed because this is a lot of information, but I figured for case studies, I wanted more rather than less so that whoever's reading it could really understand my thought process and why I made certain design decisions. I included everything from the mood board, the design system, wireframes, final designs, and even a link to the prototype at the end. Looking back, I will say this is a lot, and it might be too much, but that's something that I might edit in the future. For the case study pages, I made sure not to include any animations in case it distracted from the information, but if you go to the homepage, you'd notice that there's some animations when you load, as well as a little bit of interaction design, especially with the cards. Alright, so next up I wanted to talk about anything that I would change, some mistakes that I made because I was rushing through it so fast, and some reflections I had about this whole process. But I do want to take a little bit of a break, so I'll meet you guys after. Alright, so looking at it now, 6 months later, there's already so much I want to change. I want to add more moving elements and animations for the product images, so I'm planning on learning how to use Rive or Jitter for something like that. And also, maybe it's because I've looked at it so many times already, but it looks pretty outdated to me, even though it's only technically 6 months old. I think it's because I've grown and learned so much in this time frame, so I'll maybe update the design a bit as well. And of course, next time, maybe I'll try to code out the whole thing when I have some time. And I know there's a lot of coding AI tools out there that can help expedite this process. Also, I already have some finished client projects that I have to add, plus some personal explorations that I've been working on. Some clients are still NDA, so those will have to wait a little bit. Maybe in the near future, I can create another video on the updates I've made to my portfolio, but I wanted to create this video for you now, in case you were thinking about creating one, or wanted to understand the process of how I created my portfolio. As for the timeline, it took me about a week to figure out what goes into a good portfolio, a few more weeks, maybe even a month to finish writing all my case studies for all of the projects, but I also needed that time to gather all of the images and all of the assets. Then it probably took another 3 or 4 weeks to successfully put everything laid out in Figma so that I can port that over to Framer, and then another few weeks for me to figure out Framer, put everything in correctly, and then publish it. So all in all, it probably took about 3 to 4 months from start to finish, which is actually pretty fast in my opinion, and not in a good way, especially because I do think I rushed a lot of things, and I could have made my portfolio better. But here's the thing. The imperfect portfolio still got me clients. It's done its job, and I think that's the important lesson. Done is sometimes better than perfect. If I'd waited until I had the perfect portfolio, I'd probably still be waiting. So that's the full process of how I created my portfolio. If you're thinking about building yours, especially if you're still working full-time, my biggest advice to you would be to be really realistic about the timeline. It took a lot longer than I thought it would. Use a template if you need to start out. Focus on explaining your thinking and not just the pretty pictures. And remember that you can always iterate later. Let me know if this was helpful, or if you have any questions about any part of the process. Feel free to leave a comment on what you want to see next, or if you have any design tips for me as well. I'm always looking to improve my process. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.